now time to get started, and I believe just about everyone's here who said they were going to be here, so I want to introduce myself. My name is Michelle Casella. I'm with Rutgers Cooperative Extension in Gloucester County. And I think many of you have probably met me before, maybe at the Ag Convention or other organization meetings. But tonight I'm here because we've worked with Farm Bureau over the last couple of years to talk about leadership training. And really, we're here and you're all here because you're volunteers of your organizations through county boards of agriculture primarily. And before we start into our presentation, I just want to thank you all for your service and for representing your boards of ag or the agriculture industry on behalf of everyone in the state who is in the industry and helping with agricultural issues. So tonight we're going to keep it pretty short for my introduction because we have a lot of important information to go over. First, we're going to start off with Liz Thompson from Farm Bureau, who's going to go over meeting procedure. Liz is an excellent person to go over this because before joining Farm Bureau and in her educational years, Liz actually served with New Jersey FFA in a role with them. And if any of you have been involved with FFA in the past, they really teach and educate on Robert's Rules of Order and parliamentary procedure. So we'll have Liz talk about that. After Liz, I will talk about expectations of being a director or officer, and we actually have a guidance document for that I'll show you. And then we'll wrap up with the last presentation with some legal aspects for county boards of agriculture. And Lou Goldshore, who works with New Jersey Farm Bureau as an attorney, will go over some insurance issues, some nonprofit status information and procedures on how to keep your board legal. And then our leadership from Farm Bureau, Peter Fury as a director, will go over and just do a wrap up for us, and we'll have questions and answers. But I want to encourage you throughout any of the presentations, if you have any questions, we can make some brief questions, but I know Pete's going to lead a wrap up at the end. So without further ado, I want to introduce Liz Thompson, and she has a slide set too that we'll put up. And Liz, thank you for talking about how to run a meeting efficiently.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you, Michelle. So Ben is going to share my screen for me because I'm working off my phone tonight because I'm actually headed to a county board meeting right after this is over with. I was glad to see that we're recording this because I hope that we can share it with other members who weren't able to attend tonight. So Ben, we can go ahead to my next slide. Okay, so the first thing you want to do to establish priorities for running an efficient meeting is you want to set your agenda. And that agenda should be sent out to all of your participants in advance. This gives everyone an idea of what to expect at the meeting, and it also can help your members prepare themselves so that if there's a report they need to give or there's something they want to bring up or a motion they would like to move forward, they'll be prepared to do that. The majority of your agenda, if you haven't read one or you haven't looked at one recently, the majority of the agenda is going to be the same every single month. It's going to have very standard items on it. The new things will be any new business items, guest speakers, special presentations. And we can advance. This gives you an idea of what should be on your agenda. And again, this will vary from county to county and vary from different types of organizations. But generally speaking, you're going to start by calling the meeting to order, reading and approving the minutes. I would strongly recommend that you also send your minutes out in advance. It just gives your members, again, a chance to review those ahead of time. So if there are any corrections that need to be made, that can happen at that time. You'll handle your treasurer's report. And then move into your reports of cooperating groups and associations. That's where you're going to have reports from things like Rutgers Cooperative Extension, the Farm Bureau, maybe some commodity groups, that type of thing. And then after that, typically you would move into committee reports. Committee reports would be for things like if you have a committee for legislative issues, or you have a committee for your annual meeting, or a county fair committee, that type of thing. Then you move into unfinished business, which is exactly what it sounds like. Unfinished business is all of the things that you maybe started working on in a previous meeting, but didn't complete or still need to be addressed. When that's done, you move on to any new business that may come up. Your agenda may reflect new business items you know will be brought up, or things could come from your membership from the floor. Once all business has been transacted, conducted, approved, or dispersed in some way, then you'll adjourn your meeting. If you follow the same basic agenda at every meeting, your members get to be accustomed to what to expect at a meeting. And the more accustomed they are to how the meeting works, the more comfortable they are, the more comfortable they'll be participating, not just maybe sitting and not participating. Okay, next. Tips for running the meeting. First of all, the number one thing I can recommend for an efficient meeting is starting on time. If you start late, after a while, your members start to show up late because they think, well, we never start on time anyway, and then you never start on time. So do your best if you're chairing the meeting to start on time, just to get everybody accustomed to being there and being there on time. When I mention everyone being there, you do need to ensure before you conduct any official business that you have a quorum. A quorum is the number of members required to be in attendance in order to conduct official business. That number will vary from county to county, depending on what your bylaws say. So if you don't know what your quorum is for your county board, you should consult your bylaws to find out. If you don't have a quorum, you cannot vote on things. You can't have any official business conducted. Next, maintain a sense of order. First, by following the agenda so that everybody knows what order things go in and what to expect. And secondly, to follow Robert's rules. And that's really, I guess, the meat of my presentation tonight. Robert's Rules of Order is actually the title of a book. And this book has been around for many, many years, and there have been many different versions of it and updates, but it's a book outlining very specific rules of parliamentary procedure that guide how meetings are supposed to be conducted. And there's a couple of guiding principles when it comes to Robert's Rules. The first is fairness. It's ensuring that everyone has the right to speak. Robert's Rules says everyone should have a chance to talk before the same person speaks again on an issue. And I know that doesn't always happen in meetings. That's not always followed, but that is really the principle of Robert's Rules, is to give everyone a voice, and then additional people, or then people can speak repetitively if they have new comments to make. The second guiding principle is transparency. It's making sure that everyone feels like they know exactly what's going on. They feel like they're aware of the process. Nothing's being handled behind closed doors. If you're a member of the executive board, you know what's happening and you have a say. And the third thing that is a guiding principle of Robert's Rules is clarity. You discuss one motion, one issue at a time. You don't handle multiple motions. You handle one and either it's passed or it's defeated or it's postponed, and then you move on to the next. And it makes it simpler and easier to understand. It's very clear for everyone. Next. So I talked about motions and only doing one motion at a time. I'm assuming pretty much everyone on this call has been at a meeting or a convention where there were motions and you heard people saying second. A motion is simply the topic that's under discussion and the action you want to take on it. So the example I have here is that someone could say, I move that we hold a farm tour for legislators. That's a motion. After the president recognizes someone from the board, that person, any member of your executive board can make a motion, and that motion is on the table as long as there's no other motion currently pending. You can't make one if there's one already out there. The motion requires a second. That means one other person on the board has to agree that this motion is worth discussing. They may not necessarily agree with the motion, but they think it's worthy of having the conversation. And once it's moved and seconded, then that is when discussion takes place. And each motion has to be dispensed with in some way before you bring another one out. So either pass it, defeat it, table it, refer it to a committee, postpone it, but it has to be done before you do another motion. The only exception to that is an amendment, which we'll cover on the next slide. So this I put on here ways to handle a motion, but really it's different types of motions. The first one, a member wants to bring up an idea before a group. So the president recognizes the member and they present their motion. A second is required. And if there is a second, then it's discussed and considered. When there's no more discussion, if there is no more discussion, then it's voted on. All four of the motions I'm talking about today require a simple majority vote. So there are some advanced motions that require a 2/3 majority. None of these are that. So simple majority rules. So if the motion goes through without any changes or amendment, it's simply discussed until there's everyone's ready to vote, and then the president calls for the vote. If a member decides they want to change some wording in the motion, they can move to amend it. Again, same process. The president recognizes the person. It requires a second as well. Pretty much everything you put out there requires a second so that everyone knows at least two people agree it's worth discussing. At which point amendments can add words, delete words, change the language in other ways. A second's required. Once the second has happened, then it can be discussed. Sometimes this is where things get a little crazy. If you've been at our convention, sometimes you'll see on the floor a discussion and then there's an amendment and everyone has to remind themselves, are we voting? What exactly are we voting on? You will vote in reverse order of how the motion and the amendment were made. So you would vote on the amendment first, it passes or fails, and then you would vote on the main motion, either as amended, or you'll vote on it without an amendment if the amendment failed. So those are the two main ones you're going to see most often at your meetings. The two other things you'll see at the meetings would be my third bullet here. If a member wanted to postpone discussion, sometimes an issue comes up and it's important, but maybe it's not urgent, or maybe everybody needs more time to think about it. So you can move to postpone it or table it until the next meeting. Again, second, discuss and vote. And it doesn't have to be the next meeting. It could be postponed to any date that you determine. And the fourth one is similar, but different. And that is when you decide this is an important issue, but we don't want the whole board sitting here discussing the minutia of it. So maybe we should refer it to a committee and let the committee deal with all the details and then report back to the whole board. And that's handled in the exact same way. A motion to refer it to a committee, and then a second, and then discussion. That kind of motion should be as specific as possible. So what committee will handle it? When will they report back to our board so that we know when the whole board can act on it? Once in a while, you will hear something called unanimous consent. That is when there's not an official motion taken or made, and there's not an official vote. It's usually done for very minor kind of housekeeping things that everyone seems to agree on, and there doesn't seem to be any dissent. And you can say, by unanimous consent, can we, correct something or that, that kind of thing. Very often you'll see that in correcting language in a report. So that's just basically a general consensus. It's called unanimous consent. Finally, I'll hit some reminders for you. Remember that the whole point of Robert's Rules and parliamentary procedure is that all members feel they have a fair opportunity to voice their opinions and their ideas and to ask questions. When you give your members a sense that their voices are being heard, it makes them more likely to participate and be a part of the program and be a part of the meeting. The president has an important role here, and it's not just about understanding parliamentary procedure. The president's role is to manage the meeting in total.
Animals there that you can come up and, you could post it or do something with it.
I'm sorry, someone, can you please put on mute? We're hearing some background noise.
Thanks. So as you're managing your meeting, once in a while, you need to take charge and ask somebody to stop having a side conversation, or if the discussion gets a little out of control and people aren't waiting their turn to speak, you might need to use your gavel, or if you don't have a gavel, you just kind of tap on the table and ask everybody to quiet down. You don't want to do that all the time. You don't want to be abusive with that, but you do need to know that as the chair, you're the one who decides how orderly your meeting will be conducted. And if the meeting is getting out of hand, it's your job to kind of straighten it up. So that's important. And finally, and this is not always done, but really should always be done. Whenever there's a motion, the president should repeat the motion and the names of the people who moved the motion and seconded. And they should do that, first of all, to ensure that everyone in the room knows exactly what they're voting on. And secondly, it makes your recording secretary's job much easier, and their minutes will be much more accurate if you do that. But most important, it's about clarity and making sure that people know exactly what they're voting on. And finally, I have a few resources to share with you. The first link is a link to a video. And this video was actually created for 4-H. It's about 15 minutes long. I don't suggest that people who aren't really into parliamentary procedure go out and buy a copy of Robert's Rules. It's a lot. And most of what's in Robert's Rules of Order, you probably won't ever need. But what's in this 15-minute video would cover everything you would need in your meeting. And the other link is for, it's like a 2-page cheat sheet on basic motions and how to handle them. And that's also, that Cornell put that together. It's very good and it's very simple to use. So that's everything I have, unless you have any questions for me.
Hey, I have a question if no one else has any. This is Pete. Absent anybody else. Ben, could you put up the sample agenda of a typical meeting, that panel?
Okay.
So my question is, when would, in the course of a normal meeting agenda, such as we have here with the good outline that you have, where would you find motions being made most likely during the course of the meeting?
They happen throughout. You're going to have a motion to approve the minutes, a motion to approve the treasurer's report pending audit. But during reports, committee and cooperating groups, you could have some. If an issue is brought up from one of your cooperating groups, and you decide, the county board wants to donate $200 to support that cooperating group's program, it could come up there. It really could come up anywhere throughout the meeting.
Yeah, very good. I was thinking of that when you were describing how motions are made and how they're managed, and it's a very important part of the interaction. But just to have you explain it where it would fall, it makes a lot of sense. Some of us have been to meetings and recognize where motions are made, but I appreciate you explaining that in the context of the sample agenda.
Liz, this is Michelle. Can I ask a question? What happens if someone who made a motion wants to change their mind and change their motion?
They can rescind it. So, they can choose to rescind their motion, and then you don't have to go through the process of voting it down.
Very good.
The seconder is asked to agree to that as well, but.
I've got a question. It's likely rare, but I'm sure it happens from time to time. When would it be appropriate for, considering that these meetings are open to the public, when would it be appropriate for the committee or the board to go into a closed session? And by what mechanism can they do that? If conversation has to be made about someone present and they don't want to,
Sure. That's a perfect example, and it's a really good question. It's a simple motion to go into closed session. And one of the reasons could be if you're voting on whether or not to let somebody become a member of your board and you don't want to have the vote in front of them. Some county boards will use that mechanism to discuss financial matters that they don't want to have in front of everyone, but it's a simple motion with a second and a regular vote to go into closed session. Because you're a private entity, you're not under any sunshine laws or Open Public Meeting Act laws, so you're allowed to do that.
Yeah, Devin, your premise was in error. These are not public meetings. County Boards of Agriculture are private nonprofit associations. And they have, as we'll explain a little later in the meeting, public purposes to give advice to public agencies, but they are private nonprofits. But everything that Liz just described about going into a closed session, well, we don't have personnel. That's probably the most common, to go into a private session for the purpose of talking about litigation. But it's a private meeting, so it's less important as compared to if you went to a State Board of Agriculture meeting. Now that's a public entity, or if you went to like the Pinelands Commission or so forth. But there's a distinction with these county boards of ag. Lou Goldshire will cover this as our attorney a little later on in the agenda. And thank you for your question.
Thanks for clarifying.
I will say, while they are private organizations, many county boards will allow people who are Farm Bureau members, but not an executive committee member to come to a meeting. And then sometimes they don't want to discuss certain things, especially financial things, in front of those guests. So it's a useful tool.
Have a few minutes left with Liz before Michelle takes right over on the heels of Liz. Any other questions? Well, Michelle, you could take over because you have a good full agenda of things. And we thank Liz for stepping out of the other meeting and giving an excellent presentation with the PowerPoint slides. All of you on the call tonight will be getting access to these slides, either digital by your request, or we get a hard copy and mail it. So don't feel compelled to take a lot of notes. We can send these your way. And we thank Liz for the references at the back. Those are nice, handy follow-up for many of the topics that were displayed earlier. So take it away, Michelle.
Thank you, Pete, and thank you for organizing this, and thank you for the invite. And Liz and I go back quite a ways. We actually were in undergraduate school at Delaware Valley College together years ago, and I find her a great resource for things like this and other things. So thank you, Liz. I really appreciate it. So tonight I want to talk to you about a document that was written with myself and Dr. Brian Schilling at Rutgers University. Oh, I guess it's been about 8 years ago now. We just felt the need to help county boards of ag and other agricultural organizations around the state learn about the responsibilities of what it means to be a director or a leader of an organization in New Jersey. And again, thank you all for being here because you are volunteers of your organizations. So here's the fact sheet, and there's the web link for it. And actually, if you just go on the Rutgers NJAES site and go under About and click down under Publications, you just Google any of these words or search any of these words in that document, it'll come up for you. But like I said, we provided this guidance document. And quite frankly, I use that at our County Board of Agriculture. Anytime a new director comes on board, we provide them with this document. We provide them with our bylaws and also a directory of all the directors in the Gloucester County Board of Agriculture. So it might be something that some of you may want to incorporate into your boards, especially if you have new members coming on, or once a year at our reorganization meeting, we'll go through a lot of these topics I'll speak about today. So what does it mean to be a leader of an organization? And quite frankly, it's not an easy task. And many of you may shake your head when I make this statement. When you say yes, and people usually ask you to do more. It's always the people that seem to be stepping up and volunteering that are on multiple boards doing multiple volunteer work and are probably the busiest people. That just seems to be the nature of how things work. Leadership really can be developed also through mentorship. So we'll talk a little bit about mentoring some new people that may be on your board. And then with good leaders, they're not necessarily on an island by themselves or doing everything themselves. Really good leaders are those that work beside others and get others to be on board with them to help work as a team. And it's really, instead of telling others what to do, leaders really show others how they can grow and also add to the organization. Unfortunately, this doesn't always happen, though. We see organizations where just a small group of people or one or two people take over and they try to run the organization without endearing or bringing other people on board. And then a lot of times that's how an organization may fail. But really, a director is there to direct the organization. And generally, and most likely with your county boards of ag and your bylaws, the people who are directors on that board must be a standing member, a good standing member to represent that organization. And that's generally the norm. And the board of directors really should be there to create and maintain a momentum for the organization and have goals in mind and what they're trying to do and what they're trying to reach and who are they representing. And really, without strong and committed directors, organizations usually do not meet their mission and they usually lack success. And success usually doesn't go further beyond the board of directors, and it really can affect the entire membership that's being represented. Because remember, you're there to really oversee everything that affects your whole membership, even though some people may be there for their own reasons and to help their own businesses. A lot of times, the issues that come up or the reasons they're there are also the same issues and reasons that are affecting others in the industry. So the issues that we tackled, even though some people may be there for their own edification, really represent all of us and can be spread out amongst everyone. But the actions and decisions of directors really sometimes affect the entire group. So if we're bringing ourselves in a good light as directors and doing something good, we really are helping everyone. But there's also the other part of it. If there's something that's said inappropriately or we're making decisions that can hurt the industry, that could also reflect on everyone. So it's really important that we take things seriously, making sure we're representing the larger group. And really, as directors and as a board, our organizations can be catalysts for positive changes that really help sustain the agriculture industry in New Jersey. And that's the ultimate goal, to make sure we can be successful, we can have the ability to prosper in the state and to represent us well so that we can really succeed in a state that can be very challenging, we all know, with regulations and other conflicts. So what are the expectations when you become a director of a board, or what are the things that you should instill in some of your new members? Well, helping them to recognize that they should renew their membership annually. I mean, that's the basis for it, right? They're part of the group, they're a member. They should always, try to agree with and support the organization's mission. Now, that doesn't always happen, but we're going to talk about a mission statement in a little bit. But you may not always agree with every stance that the board takes after a vote, but the mission and the main reason why the organization exists is really something that a director should be in agreement with. Also, understanding the organization's bylaws. And again, bylaws are written to help organize and have a skeleton for the organization. Now, they don't have to remain stagnant. They can change, but in every bylaw, there's usually a statement that tells how the changes can be made. Most times it's when a bylaws is going to be changed, there's a certain time period when all members of that organization must be notified of the changes. And then there also should be an annual meeting or a full membership meeting when those bylaws are voted on. So that's very critical too. Bylaws just don't change willy-nilly. They actually have to change under the guise of the regulations or what is written in the bylaws. Also, what's really important when you're becoming a new director is to understand what responsibilities as a director that you have. And also regularly attend and participate in meetings. I know in the bylaws of the Gloucester County Board of Agriculture, if you miss so many consecutive meetings, you actually relinquish your participation as a director. Because a lot of times, if you can find someone who will participate and will be an active member, that seat on that board may be filled by someone who's not actively participating or putting effort forth. So that's something you might want to have in your bylaws. And I know everyone's busy and sometimes it's hard to find people to participate. But again, having someone in a seat that's not attending doesn't really help the organization. Also, as a director, it's important, just like Liz mentioned in the Roberts Rules or the parliamentary procedure, to give everyone a chance to speak up. So as a director, even if you're new, sometimes it takes a little bit to warm up to the group, but really if there's issues that come up that you're knowledgeable about or have an opinion about the subject, it's really important to speak up and participate in that discussion. Is there any questions at this point or any discussion? So also as a director, you're going to be asked to be on the board and make some decisions, but beyond the board that you're on, maybe it's the County Board of Agriculture, you may be asked to participate in a leadership role to represent the organization when needed. Things I could think of is possibly being a delegate to New Jersey Farm Bureau Convention, being a delegate to the Ag Convention, maybe being nominated by the Board of Ag to represent a commodity group within the state. So there's more to it than just meeting for your monthly meetings with County Board of Ag. You may be asked to be outside of the board as a representative and a leader. So in that, it's important to be informed of the facts that are being dealt with in your organization, locally in your county, but also keeping abreast of the state issues that are going on. And I realize that we can do this a little bit more easily nowadays. Thankful for the pandemic and maybe not thankful for the pandemic, but it has forced us all, like we're doing tonight, to be on virtually, but also realize meetings like the State Board of Agriculture and also the State Ag Development Committee now will allow you to listen in on their monthly or quarterly meetings so that we can all be informed without physically being at those meetings. If you go on their websites, a lot of times they'll have the live broadcast where you could phone in and listen. And I try to do that. And I think it's something that, all of us who are serious about knowing the issues in agriculture maybe can participate, even if you're riding in the tractor, or I may be, working at my desk on the computer and have it in the background and try to listen in and be abreast of what's going on. It really helps us all to be better leaders and have a better grasp on all the issues. The next thing is to be able to make reasonable inquiries and judgments on issues that arise. And again, that's being educated and keeping abreast of the situations. Maybe doing some reading, maybe doing some media research, reading some agriculture publications that come out, and just staying abreast of what's going on, especially in the area you represent, especially if it's a commodity area. Also, you want to be able to represent the membership in good faith without conflicts, interest, bias, or outside or inside influences. So sometimes, Liz was talking about making motions and taking votes on certain issues. It happens rarely, but I think there's times when it should happen where someone doesn't vote on an issue that comes up that has a motion and a second and discussion because they have a conflict of interest. And in those cases, maybe sometimes in good faith, we should not be participating in a vote. So again, that's personal, and you need to realize when that happens. The other thing is too, I mentioned attendance at a meeting. If someone's unable to effectively serve as a director, they maybe should have the strength of character to say they can't fulfill the role and maybe make the decision to resign. I know it's often hard to tell someone that, we don't want you to finish out your term on the board. We appreciate you step forward, but you haven't been attending, and maybe recognize that on your own and see if there's someone else who can fill that gap. Again, these are things that, most people are fellow friends that are farmers. We invite them to be on boards, but sometimes for different reasons, they can't always make it. And maybe we can find someone who can fill that role. So next, changing a little bit, is about keeping the organization viable and really focusing on direction and having a plan on what you want from your organization. So we talked a little bit about a mission statement. This is something that a business can do. Even families can do, like what are we going to do and focus on? But basically, it's having a brief statement on what you want to accomplish. Also having articles of incorporation or bylaws, and most of us as organizations have these. They're often required for nonprofit status, and Lou will talk a little bit about that later. But once a mission statement is created, it doesn't have to stay stagnant. It can be reintroduced, reviewed, and changed if needed. In our fact sheet, we made a statement, and we picked bananas because it wasn't being biased, since we really don't grow bananas in New Jersey. But the mission statement example we gave is the Banana Growers Association of New Jersey is a state organization of banana growers. Our organization is dedicated to the preservation of banana farms, farmers, farm families, associated agriculture businesses, and the allied industries and institutions. This will be accomplished by being actively involved in all issues related to the banana industry and agricultural issues. So this simply could be just change a few words if it was a commodity organization or even a county board of agriculture. And mission statements can be put on a website. It could be in the beginning of your bylaws. It just keeps kind of a statement on what you're going to accomplish and what you're going to focus on. So really having a plan and having goals of an organization to carry out your mission statement is, number one, having some goals and objectives. What do you want to accomplish in that year or even throughout many years? Also having a strategic plan of how you're going to handle finances. And remember, with our county boards of agriculture, finances come in through many ways. The main way is through partial finances of the Farm Bureau dues. So a certain percentage of those dues that are paid to New Jersey Farm Bureau do come back to help finance the county boards of agriculture. But there's also other ways. Maybe you're holding a scholarship fundraiser dinner or some event to have a mission to get some finances for some goal that the board wants to have. But managing the finances properly is very important. And realizing as a board and as a treasurer of a board or even officers of the board, you're now fiscally responsible to make sure those finances are handled in a manner that's legal and also in the best interest of that organization. Also, as an agriculture organization, public relations and educating the public and other entities, maybe it's legislators or people locally in your town, about the benefits of agriculture and what we do is in the communities is really important. And the County Board of Agriculture can be a great conduit for that, in cooperation with New Jersey Farm Bureau, maybe with the State Board of Agriculture, maybe even with Rutgers Cooperative Extension, to get the word out and educate people on what the goals of agriculture are. The next thing is something that sometimes when leaders are in positions for a long period of time on a board, there could be issues and trouble with. It's something about delegating responsibilities. It's often kind of hard when you have someone new come onto a board that you don't understand or know their capabilities. So delegating responsibilities to them is often hard for someone who likes to do things themselves. So this is something that's really important because it makes someone who is new on a board feel like they're part of the board, that they're have a reason to come to meetings and that they become part of the mission of the board. So that's something that assigning someone to a committee or assigning a responsibility to someone is really important. And it actually promotes growth in new people and fosters leadership for the future. The other thing that's really important, and we're very fortunate for county boards of agriculture, is because New Jersey Farm Bureau puts out a weekly newsletter, is communicating with your members. Some county boards of agriculture on a local level may also communicate with their members through county means, but mainly we have this covered because of the great staff at New Jersey Farm Bureau. But communication is key to keeping any organization alive. Also mentoring, and I touched on this briefly, but mentoring new people who come onto your board, maybe assigning them a partner who's been there for a long time, or just mentoring them directly through your officers, or giving them a phone number and saying, hey, if you have any questions or would like to reach out to me, that's fine. One way we also do this in Gloucester County is each year we have a directory of our directors and officers so that everyone can communicate easily with each other, especially if they're on a committee together. Then I already touched on being more than a director, being asked to be in a leadership position, maybe being a delegate or something other than just going to your monthly board meetings. And then also within your organization is you may be asked someday to take on a role as an officer. So you've been a director for a few years, you've learned the ins and outs of your group, and you may move up on the chain of command and be asked to be an officer, maybe a vice president, maybe a treasurer, maybe a secretary, and maybe even a president someday. So that comes through mentorship and building leadership and getting familiar with your board. And again, leadership roles outside of the board to represent your county, your commodity, and other aspects. So taking on the role as a director of an agricultural organization really can be a rewarding experience because you network, you get to meet leadership in other areas, you get to meet other people that help out the agricultural industry throughout the state, and you learn a lot about what's going on that affects our industry. Other directors and agriculture agency liaisons and agriculture educators and guests that attend regular meetings really can be an excellent source of information and help in the future to move the agricultural industry in New Jersey. And really the time and participation that a director devotes may seem to be great because you're going to monthly meetings, which may last an hour or a couple hours, and then you're asked to go to other meetings. But really the benefits of knowledge about what's going on in the industry really helps others and even your own business. And it may be well worth the time that's spent serving the organization and just the thought that you're helping out others that are in our industry is really an important part of being on a board. And again, I just want to thank everyone for their time and their devotion to being leaders and to joining in on these leadership opportunities. And again, we're happy to answer any questions or have any discussion about this. So thank you for participating tonight. Thank you for your volunteerism. This information will be made available later. And again, that fact sheet that I mentioned, the link was earlier here. Really appreciate that if you use that in the future and hand it out to anyone in your group who's in need of learning about what it means to be a leader on your boards. Thank you. Any questions?
Michelle, when you mentioned some folks should abstain, do you find it important to make notes in the minutes of who's abstaining, especially if you have members of higher board members that need to recuse themselves on certain items?
Alan, that's a great question. So in our minutes, we'll write who made the motion, who made the second. And then when we make a vote, a lot of times we don't record how many positive votes or negative votes or even abstentions. But quite frankly, I don't think that's a bad idea. I think it's a good idea, especially if it's something that's very controversy. Say it was something, something financially that was being discussed, and maybe someone who's a member of your organization sits on a bank board or a financial institution board, and they don't want to participate in that. They want to abstain from that. For legal reasons later on, especially if someone questions your finances and said that, well, that person shouldn't have voted because they sit on a bank board, you have it in the minutes that this person abstained. So in certain situations, it's probably not a bad idea to have a yay or nay vote. I've actually sat in organizations where I actually think they should have taken a roll call vote to make sure that, within the organization, they knew who voted and how they voted. And again, these are confidential within your boards. Pete brought up a great point that our Board of Agriculture meetings are not open to the public. It's a private membership meeting of a nonprofit association. So we can't be Oprah'd. That's the other thing. We're not a government organization having meetings through county boards of agriculture. So no one can Oprah your records. Lou will talk about it. There are some things that nonprofit groups have to adhere to with the state and with legal ramifications. But honestly, I like that idea of knowing how people voted, and we don't get that controversial at county boards of ag, but I agree with you. There's times we should know how people voted and record that. Good point, Alan.
Michelle, this is Pete. So actually two questions. One has to do with the role of the president in shutting down or directing or moving on from a long-winded member of the board who has made the point over and over again, and it's just kind of beating it to death. May the president intervene politely to shut that down in order to keep the meeting on its own course. And a parallel question to that is there anything wrong with setting a time limit for the entire meeting? For example, 2 hours as a maximum, so that everybody knows how much business needs to be covered and how much time there is to cover it.
Pete, those are great points. And certainly, as a president of an organization, or if you're not the president and you have to run a meeting in absence of the president, you certainly can call a vote. It's the president's job in the meeting to actually set the tone and make sure everyone's being heard and that the Robert's Rules of Parliamentary Procedure is being adhered to. But part of that procedure is you can call the vote. Now, if someone still wants to discuss and have more discussion, someone may make a motion to table the vote until next meeting so that you're not there, all night long discussing that topic. We actually had I see Ann Dorsett here, she'll agree with me. We actually had a president years ago who brought a kitchen timer and the bell went off when it was your time to stop speaking and made the meeting go quick. I'm not sure if we always got all the discussion and we needed to, but even our current county board president, likes to keep meetings to more than an hour. Everyone's working hard all day. It's late at night. You're serving your time. And but if there's an important topic we need to get to, we get through it and we spend our time seriously. I think everyone who comes to these Board of Ag meetings is there because they're dedicated, they care about the industry, and they want to make sure that, we're progressing and supporting what we need to support. But that's a great question. So yes, keeping it to no more than a certain amount of time. And when a new president or new person who's running the organization comes in, that might be something that they set groundwork for. It could be something you put in your bylaws if you want a bylaws that says a meeting shall last no more than an hour. But that's a good point. So yeah, it's up to the president to set the tone. Anyone can make a motion during a meeting to table a discussion, call a vote, things like that. But it's everyone being heard and everyone participating in that discussion. But good points, Pete.
Exactly. I think the president has a leading role for the reason. I mean, every board has to have a president, someone to provide that kind of leadership. And I'm not suggesting that everybody is befallen with long-winded meetings. I don't mean to say that at all. We have a lot of issues to cover, and it takes time to do it responsibly and properly. But there's nothing that kills a meeting quicker than people, getting bored or turned off to a long-winded speaker. So I think these are some of the sensitive questions that can go a long way to improving and sustaining interest in having people come back and have new people want to join.
I agree, Pete. And one other point I want to make is, besides just having your board of directors for county boards, there's no reason why you couldn't have separate committee meetings where someone works on maybe vegetable issues or livestock issues, or we used to have a legislative committee years ago that worked on just legislative topics. Have them meet separately on their own and then bring a finalized report to the board, so that we don't have to discuss in long periods of time certain issues that can be done on a committee basis. That works very well when we can get time to do that.
Okay, is anybody we haven't heard from that would like to make a question, or should we go on to the next speaker? Okay.
Rick Wenzel has his hand raised.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. So a couple times now, I've heard about the County Board of Ag meetings being non-public and private. So my question is, how can they not be open to the public when they're publicly advertised in a public building, receive public funds from the county commissioners, and have Rutgers presentations by organizations like 4-H?
Well, Pete, I can answer that. So
Okay.
Rutgers is invited to county boards of agriculture, and county boards of agriculture are our stakeholder groups that we use for feedback. Now, you're right, when it's held in a government building, but it doesn't necessarily have to be held in a government building. And some county boards don't meet in extension offices. But Pete, you might want to mention more.
I think these are questions that Lou is probably going to address in the legal aspect. So when we move into Lou presentation, we can talk about the structure, the legal structure, which is founded in the bylaws. So these public advisory roles do not make the county board a public entity. And that's rooted in the statutes that give them these advisory roles. It's not power, it's a role. And they go back many, many years. The Department of Ag has advisory, the county boards have advisory for the Department of Ag and for Rutgers. And then the third part of that is private function that the county boards have that is written into the bylaws. But let's pause a little bit on those legal questions for Lou and see if there's any other general questions about the county boards before we move on. Okay, so let's go to Lou Culture is on the program tonight for just the reason that Rick's questions about the legalities, and it's puzzling to him how you can mix a public role with a private entity, and there's the role of the bylaws, and so there's some legal aspects to the county boards, and we'd like to have some discussion about that. There's also a little bit of liability, and some county boards have insurance coverage for general liability and so forth, and Lou's got his own little take on what the county boards are all about and how they should conduct themselves. So Lou is general counsel to the Farm Bureau. And he's been that way, what, about 12 years now, Lou?
Just about. I think it's closer to 8 or 9. I think this is not year 9.
Time flies when you're having fun, I'm sure. So Lou is in private practice. He's semi-retired. And he has a stellar career as an environmental attorney, but mostly representing businesses and landowners who have coped with DEP regulations and municipal regulations and even farmland preservation regulations. So we thought he was well suited to come on board as the general counsel. He's on retainer, so he does a little bit of work each month, and then we call on him for some specific projects. So tonight is one of those times where we ask him to step out and help with the training program, County Boards of Ag. So Lou Belcher out of Princeton, New Jersey, why don't you take it away?
Well, thanks very much, Pete. Michelle or Ben, could you put up my first slide? The next one. Yeah, could you advance it?
Yeah, there we go.
There we go. Yeah, the essence of county boards is that they're private, not public organizations. There are a couple of references in the statutes to county boards. Of course, the NJDA was encouraged to assist in county boards formation. The boards have 2 delegates at the annual, each board has 2 delegates at the annual Ag Convention. and they can recommend former members for appointments to the county ag development boards. Some county boards meet in county buildings, including, I think it's Sussex, meets in the county commissioners' rooms. But that doesn't make them into public agencies. The definition in Oprah and in other statutes for public bodies does not include these nonprofit corporations. The next slide indicates could you advance to the next slide, please? Thanks. They're organized under the New Jersey nonprofit corporation statute, and these corporations have certificates of incorporation, and they also have bylaws. I recommend that to members of county boards that you take a look at the bylaws. They generally follow sort of a uniform protocol. I think there must have been some model bylaws that were circulated for agricultural organizations, and many of them, by the way, are out of date, and, but they're worth looking at. They do. I have Somerset. I'm looking at Somerset's right now, and they do provide for what a quorum is in that case and how you amend the bylaws. And it provides, for example, that the bylaws, in the case of Somerset, the bylaws may be amended at any annual meeting of the board by an affirmative vote of the voting members present. And it goes through how they get circulated in advance. But your bylaws in a particular county may be different. So it's worth looking at them, maybe as a homework assignment sometime, to take a look at the bylaws and see if they could be modernized, updated, to address issues that come up on a regular basis. Pete asked me to talk a bit about the non-for-profit procedure. One of the things that you will, as a not-for-profit corporation, receive annually from the state is an annual registration requirement. They send around the notices. I think I have one somewhere here. And it's essentially a reporting form, very short. It's done online these days. And the annual filing fee, last time I checked, was $30. But it's important, if you get something from the Secretary of State or Business Office of the state, that you not throw it in, that you address it and file it annually as required and pay the fee, because there are revocation provisions. So be aware of that. In terms of insurance, I assume that the county boards don't have a huge exposure to liability, but on the other hand, there's always the possibility that there'd be a slip and fall or some kind of claim. And as I understand it, and Pete, farm family issues policies to county boards for of insurance for those kinds of things. The other thing I wanted to mention is the taxation issue. be aware that county boards are exempt from federal taxes pursuant to 501c5. I know a lot of people are familiar with 501c3, which is the Internal Revenue Code provision for charitable organizations, but there's a special provision for agricultural organizations, and it's 501c5. And it provides for exemption from federal tax for agricultural organizations, and it provides that the qualifications to be exempt are fairly easy to qualify. The objects of the organization, the purposes of the organization must be for the betterment of conditions of those engaged in the pursuits of agriculture or horticulture, the improvement of the grade of their products, and the development of a higher degree of efficiency in their respective occupation. There is a provision in 501c3 of the code, the Internal Revenue Code, that provides that the net earnings of the organization may not accrue to the benefit of any member. So be aware of that. They also send, it's important to recognize that there's a filing, there's an annual information return, filing return for 501c5 organizations. If the revenue raised by the organization is less than $50,000, there's a very easy form. It's 990N as in Nancy, and it provides for electronic. Used to be a postcard. It's an electronic postcard now. So if just be aware that that's part of what the obligations of a 501c5 organization entail. The filing date is generally it isn't April 15th, it's May 15th. There are some, it depends on when the tax year ends. If it's ending on, if you have a calendar tax year and your tax year ends 12/31, December 31, then the filing date for the 990N, so the information return, is May 15th.
Lou, can I interrupt for 1 second? This is
Sure.
Peter. So basically what Lou is saying is an area of reporting responsibility for each county board. And I'm very pleased to say that all of you are in compliance with the annual filing for the state of New Jersey nonprofit certification. Okay, we had our bookkeeper, Barbara Bashida, do a survey, and our staff hustled it out, and we made sure that all of you were filing so you didn't get in trouble. So the state of New Jersey, the nonprofit is one filing and the IRS is another. And you don't have any tax to pay. There's a reporting requirement. If your revenue is less than 50,000, there's almost like a one pager. And that's generally the county board's treasurer responsibility. And just keep that current and you'll be in good shape. It's not complicated. It's not an onerous thing. So we don't want to scare you into thinking that there's like hidden liabilities here. This is just kind of pro forma stuff that you'd have to do as a nonprofit organization. Go ahead, Nick.
Right. Let's go to the next couple of slides. We can skip over 3 and 4 because I think Liz and Michelle covered those pretty well. By the way, there's definition of bylaws, and going to the source is the next thing. That book on I guess it's on my left, I don't know if it's on your right, the brown book is Robert's Rules. I think that's the 12th edition. There's a 14th edition now. No, that's the 10th edition. There are a couple of editions after that, 700 pages. So there, I don't think anybody has to worry about that, about 700 pages of rules. Last time we gave this course, the president of Farm Bureau, Reich Saddam, was on the call, and he indicated that nobody needs to sweat this too much. I mean, it's very important to know the basics that Liz and Michelle covered, but nobody has to memorize the 700 pages in Robert's Rules. It's just important to have organized and meetings that follow an agenda, that where people are respectful to each other, where the president controls the discussion, directs the discussion in an orderly and democratic way. There are a number of booklets. I think Liz and Michelle mentioned some of them. Some of them, I like the one on the right. The next slide, if you can advance it, please, is another simplified handbook of parliamentary procedures. I found that one to be very helpful. There are cheat sheets out there that were mentioned, and I think the next slide has references to them, and I think Michelle mentioned some as well. And another point that Wright mentioned 2 years ago is as you get familiar with Robert's Rules, you get better at it over time. So I think learning the basics, following the basics, recognizing, and if we can go over to slide 11. Here we go.
Exempt
Yeah,
status file.
yeah. There are some final thoughts, and really what the whole purpose is to ensure that the meetings are conducted in an efficient and fair manner, not to get overly formal, but to understand the basics of Robert's Rules so that both the majority members and the minority members feel that they were heard, listened to, and respected. And I think that's basically the message of today's meeting. And with that, I'll respond to any questions that you may have.
I have a question for Lou. Lou, Gary DeFelice.
Hi.
On the bylaws, you speak about updating. How often do you recommend between updates?
Well, some of the ones I'm looking at, this is 1998. I represent the farm market, and theirs were 1947. Much too long. I would say at least every 2 or 3 years, somebody should, one of the things to ask a new member or a member of a county board, take a look at our bylaws and suggest what needs to be changed. I think every 3 years is a good model to at least look at them and decide whether something needs to be changed.
Thank you.
Okay, can I make a comment or two? Hello?
Howard, please. Howard Myers, Mercer County. Howard is
Yes.
law officer at Mercer, and you're currently the treasurer in Mercer.
Yes.
And you've had some experience with buying an insurance policy for your county board, and you've been around a long time. So we welcome your comments.
Okay, the first comment I wanted to make while we were on the subject of the 501c5 and the filing, the 990, it was my understanding that one of the reasons that needed to be filed and kept current was that it was possible to lose your nonprofit status if you didn't file it for 3 years consecutively. Now, I don't know if that's 100% correct, but that's the impression that I've operated under. And I've always filed it. Our fiscal year ends in August, so it's 5 months from the end of your fiscal year, whenever that is. The other comment I wanted to make, or just ask about, maybe I should ask about this. What is the attorney's feeling on the board's insurance as far as having D&O insurance? One thing, we have D&O insurance in addition to general liability. And one of the reasons for that is that, for example, if someone were to be hurt at the 4-H fair, the county board has supervision over 4-H and therefore the 4-H fair, and some aggressive individual might throw a loop over everybody on the county board if there was an incident. And so I was advised that it was a good idea to have D&O insurance to protect all the board members. And so we have general liability and D&O insurance, and unfortunately, that's one of the biggest expenses the board has. But I just didn't feel that it was responsible to not have that coverage in place. And I wonder if the attorney's got any comments on that.
Sure. Thank you, Howard. I'm looking, let me deal with the tax issue first. I'm looking at an IRS circular annual electronic filing requirements for the 990N. And you're absolutely right. It says organizations that fail to file required forms 990 or 990N for 3 consecutive years will automatically lose their tax exempt status. So your recollection is spot on about the need to do it. And I would recommend that it's done every year, so you never have to worry about that. With respect to D&O, that's directors and officers coverage. I think that really depends on the nature of the county board. When I say that, what activities the county board gets involved in. I think insurance, I'm over-insured personally, just so that I can rest easy and sleep nights. I think that if there's any suggestion that you're doing more than just having meetings and making recommendations, if you're running anything like a 4-H activity, etc., having both general liability, comprehensive general liability, CGL or general liability, and having directors and officers coverage is a very good idea.
One additional comment, if I could. You mentioned farm family. We used to have the insurance with farm family, and they dropped that policy. They decided they weren't going to write that anymore, and we had to go out to different insurance companies. And I'm using the Hartford for one. And
just for D&O or
no, the general liability. And originally the general liability policy was really very reasonable. It was only a couple of $100 a year. And they farm family, unless I'm real wrong about this, farm family dropped that coverage, not just on our board, but they decided they just weren't going to write those policies anymore. And I'm not aware that there were ever any claims against those policies, but they just decided they didn't want to write them anymore. And so I had to go to U.S. Liability Company in Hartford to get the D&O and the general liability for our board.
Yeah, so this is Pete. Let me explain that. So Farm Family has been bought out by another larger insurance company, American National. They're based in Galveston, Texas, and they bought the whole Northeast Farm Family whole. And so they're making policies out of Galveston, Texas now by way of a regional office in Albany. And they've taken some changes in what they've been underwriting and what they're selling. And when Lou and I were speaking, when I referred this afternoon to Farm Family, historically, Farm Family has provided that. So you're probably right that the general liability, they didn't see any future in it, any profit in it, so they just ceased. But it's not a unique agricultural type of insurance. The fact that you were able to find other coverage from a general liability company proves that. So what we're trying to do in this seminar here is just introduce the idea of D&O, and thank you, Howard, for explaining the difference between the general liability and D&O. And if you wouldn't mind, would you tell us the premium that you're paying annually for any other county that might be on this call, if they want to consider that, if not even call you up and ask you for your experience? You're in the upper $700 or $800 premium range, as I recall. And you don't have to answer that if you don't want to. Okay, any other questions for
Howard,
Lou?
Howard's on mute, so we couldn't hear him. He's on mute.
Pete Terrier has a question.
Go ahead.
Um,
Warren County, welcome to the meeting. Happy to have your question.
Thank you, Pete. Appreciate all the work you guys do. Hypothetically, suppose the board didn't file and after 3 years they have lost it. If you try to file, then IRS says they want all the stuff going back, like since you haven't filed in 15 years. Who or where, how would you fix that?
I don't know. Lou, do you want to answer that?
With great difficulty.
It's tremendous difficulty.
Yeah.
It's a hypothetical, Terry. We get that, but the analogy I make is compliance is the way you should run your farm. You don't have to kiss up to these enforcement regulators, but you need to be in compliance so that if someone comes up by with an inspection, they look around and you have all your papers in order, they're going to suspect that you understand risk and you've got policies and coverage. So the fact that we're having this seminar is to bring out this information to keep everybody in compliance so that you don't have these awful things in hypotheticals. So,
Well, it's not a hypothetical. I don't know how to fix. I got the state fixed. It wasn't done. So I've sat and I've tried, and you have no idea. Well, maybe you guys have, and I have a good financial background in dealing. I can't get through the IRS and what they're requiring from me, I can't possibly give. So I don't know how to get back into the 990.
Well, we can talk offline and talk about your specific situation, see if we can help. But I've got Warren County down here is in compliance not only with the state nonprofit, but also, all right, there's a little blank here with Warren County. So you're one of the exceptions that may have a little bit of homework to do. We're happy to help you if we can. And the purpose of bringing this up is so that everybody takes note of it and checks the box and keep yourself in compliance.
So I'll check with you on that, Pete, later.
We're happy to take the call. We'll see what we can do.
Thank
So,
you, sir.
Lou, in the interest of time, I got 20 after 8. I think if anybody has any other questions, they know how to get a hold of you or call the office and we'll kind of pivot you into Lou. And if I may take the last 10 minutes to kind of summarize, Ben, did you want to put my slides up?
Yes.
And while Ben's getting my couple of slides, I'm going to run through. I'm not even going to walk through. I'm going to run through mine because we did this 2 years ago. I wanted to make sure everybody is aware that we have the president of the Farm Bureau on the call here tonight, Alan Carter, who took over for Reich Sedam that Lou referred to. So we thank Alan for taking the time to be on, and he's very interested in all these educational programs that we might provide. And when we finish up, we're going to talk about what we might do going forward in for the rest of 2023. So what I have, and I did this a little while ago and updated. I'm just going to repeat. Can you can you all read that? Okay, so, I'm just going to summarize. The county board is a sovereign entity, right? It's a private nonprofit. It's independent. You're not subordinate to anybody. You're not a government agency. And then this is the foundation and the unique institutional structure that we have in agriculture. It's that three-legged stool. So you have the department and the state board of ag is one leg, and the Rutgers, the board of managers, another leg. And then the Farm Bureau is the private. It's the private independent part of that three-legged stool that we have is a consolidated institutional structure for farmers to be part of and to have a common voice and strength, beyond their own farm into the county and the counties up to the state. And I want to give a plug for the American Farm Bureau Federation, which is a federation of 50 states plus the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, the latter of which we're going to have to visit next week for the first time in our history. So we're kind of feel a new part of agriculture in the Farm Bureau family in just a few days. The third point there is self-appointing leadership. There's nobody above you. The sovereign is, you appoint your own leadership and you govern yourself. And the dues, it's voluntary. Nobody forces anybody to join. And it's an annual dues, right? So it's a voluntary thing and it's renewed every year. How about that for accountability? If somebody doesn't like it, they don't pay and they don't rejoin. So we're hoping for loyalty and doing all these strong things to keep everybody in the membership. And the number 5 point there is history. And I don't have time to go over that, but look at that history. 1887, the county boards were created by the legislature under the same statute that created the Department of Ag, I might add. 1919 was the Council of the County Boards of Agriculture. That's when the whole Farm Bureau thing started in the immediate wake of World War I. Won't bore you with those details, but it's kind of interesting history. Farm Bureau was founded to be more aggressive to help the viability and profitability of farming. How's that for history repeating itself? So Experiment Station has a glorious history. That's the land grant. You know all about that. And the county boards were the advisors to good Rutgers land grant about the physical needs of farming practices and give input to the professors and researchers and teachers at the land grant school. And 1933 is when the New Jersey Farm Bureau name was incorporated, and it succeeded from the New Jersey Federation of County Boards of Ag. So number 6, bylaws, we talked about that, sets forth the rules of governance and for the county board. And the Farm Bureau is tied to the county boards through a memorandum of understanding. And the most recent update of that was 2013. Some of you may have remembered that exercise of all the counties adopting a common memorandum of understanding between itself and the State Farm Bureau. Number 7 is the annual filings. We just went over that. We have a couple of 2 or 3 counties are not up to snuff, but most everybody's doing a good job there. And then number 8, these are the important advisory functions given to the county boards through statute. They appoint delegates to the State Ag Convention, and that convention has other delegates from commodity associations and so forth, but the county boards provide a bulk of those delegates. The second bullet point appoints the directors and the convention delegates to the Farm Bureau. And that's it. Farm Bureau has nothing other than what the county boards send to it in terms of directors during the year for monthly meetings and the convention in November. And lastly, the more modern update of the responsibilities of the County Board of Ag is for the CADBs, the County Ag Development Boards. And guess what? That populates the adjudicatory board for Right to Farm. And Right to Farm happens to be the number 1 or number 2 issue of all the farmers in New Jersey, repeated year after year, Right to Farm. And there you go. The county boards are right in the middle of that. Farmland preservation dollars. The county freeholder commissioners are providing local dedicated taxes to match the significant amount of dedicated tax at the state level. And that finances the farm preservation every year. So there you go. County boards are in the middle of the farm preservation and Right to Farm. Number 9 is this other sources of information at self kind of explanatory and that's all I got. So I kind of ran through that. I got 5 minutes left. I want to thank everybody for coming on. I think we had more than 10 counties on the call tonight, right? I think we had representatives of Monmouth, Mercer, Ocean, Hunterdon, Gloucester, Warren, Salem, Cape May, Somerset, and Atlantic. And are there any other counties on called that I didn't just mention there. It's somebody that signed up later on. So we were real happy with the turnout and the number of counties represented. Alan Carter, would you like a minute here to kind of summarize for the good of the order as we get close to adjournment at 8:30?
Oh, well, first, again, thanks everyone for attending this, one of our first education Zoom meetings or meeting in general. And as Pete mentioned, I'm kind of excited. I'd like to do a few more of these. So we're going to be looking for some input on what other types of other topics you'd all like to have some informative education sessions on. So keep that in mind and reach out to us and let us know. But other than that, thank you very much.